Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you've joined us wherever you are. We're on TV Santa Barbara here locally and around the world on Facebook and social media, and we're glad you're with us. I have a special guest today, Josh Weitzman, who is the Executive Director of the Alpha Resource Center here in Santa Barbara, which you'll hear all about in a minute. Josh is a good friend. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Josh may be a little bit tired. He just returned from a Disneyland trip with his kids. So if he falls asleep or gets tired, we'll give him some grace. So Josh, I thought we'd just start with a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up, your family of origin? Kind of tell us about that.
Yeah, I grew up out in Santa Clarita, about an hour and 15 minutes from Santa Barbara, down by Magic Mountain. Spent a lot of time there in high school. Family, I'm the oldest of 6. So it's me and my sister who are biological, and then I have 4 adopted siblings. Sister and brother from Korea, another brother from Russia, and then another brother who's actually my second cousin, I think it is.
Oh, really?
So yeah, my parents found out he was in the foster system, and we had known him when he was young, and so he is my youngest brother. But we've never actually lived together. He was adopted after I was married. We've got a good relationship. But
wow.
Yeah, so a big spread in ages.
So I didn't know that. So we're going to talk about your own family and your adoption.
Yeah.
But you grew up in that kind of an environment where there was adoption. And your parents just had a heart for that, or?
Well, I think they were going to stop after 2, and then, if I remember correctly, my mom saw a story back in the day, Holt International, I think it was, and they were adopting kids from Korea. They had a whole show on it, and she loved the idea and finally talked my dad into it. And,
wow.
And so, we ended up with 6 of us. It was a big family.
Wow. And what was your neighborhood like?
It was upper middle class, the suburbs, tract homes.
Okay.
We all played outside and knew each other. Moms would, come out in the street and yell for people to come home for dinner.
Yeah,
and
that sounds a little bit like my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Southern California, suburbia.
Right.
Yeah.
Great weather year round.
Yeah, that's great. Your wife is Jamie?
Yes.
And how long have you been married?
We've been married 20 years.
20 years.
Yes.
How'd you meet?
We met at the college group at the church on the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had grown up at another church, went off to my freshman year of college in Washington. When I came back, my parents had switched churches. They said, "You're an adult, do whatever you want." I said, "Well, I have no clue why I'd stay here. I'll go where you guys are." And so I was looking to meet people and thought the college group's a great place to start, and had said in my mind intentionally, I'm just going to meet some guys so that I have a group of friends to hang out with. And she was the first person I saw.
Oh, really?
She walked into this corridor that led down to the building where the college group was, and I thought, wow, she's pretty, and then decided to avoid her because I wasn't there to meet girls. And within a few minutes, we had sat at different tables. She said, "Hey, you want to come sit over here?" And we started hanging out, and over the course of a couple years, got engaged and then married. And
wow.
Yeah.
And you have, remind me again, how many kids of your own, and then 1 adopted, right?
Yeah, 3 biological
3
daughters,
and 1.
and then our son is adopted.
Okay. And I want to get to that in a second. Talk about your faith journey. It sounds like, you were raised in a Christian home?
Yeah. Well, my parents got married. My dad was Jewish, and my mom was Catholic.
Okay.
Neighbors were Christians and had invited my mom to church. She converted to Christianity. My dad, several years after that, which was kind of caused a little turmoil with his parents, but they finally accepted it. So I was raised basically in a Christian home my whole life.
Okay.
As I understand from my parents, I said the sinner's prayer at like 3 or 4 years old, but it was really 10th grade where it became real for me.
Okay.
In fact, there was one morning I remember very clearly where I was laying in bed. I'd always been a good kid, kind of afraid to break the rules. Our church was into rules, maybe a little bit toward the legalistic side at times, and I had bought into this, and you got to be a good kid. And it was 10th grade. I was laying in bed one morning and thought, I wonder if this is real. What would happen if I just did whatever I felt like today? And so I had a loft bed, and I had gotten down the steps toward the door with this in my mind, like, today I'm just gonna do whatever the heck I want. And I got about 3 steps from the door and just realized I can't do that. It was the first time I had this conviction and realized that this relationship with Jesus is really mine. And I don't want to live that way. I want to continue with what I've done. And that's probably the point in my life where it was my
Wow.
decision.
That's pretty mature thinking for a 10th grader.
Or just a random good day.
Right. Well, whatever. That's great.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. Your dad had Jewish roots,
Mm-hmm.
and then he converted
Yes.
with your mom.
Yeah, shortly after my mom.
Okay, that's really interesting. And so 10th grade though is when you felt like kind of you owned it, and this is how you're
Mm-hmm.
going to live your life.
Yeah, it was definitely that moment that I still remember.
And where'd you go to college?
I went to college. Well, I graduated from what's now called the King's University. It's out in Dallas. It was the King's College when I graduated from it. It was in Van Nuys at the time, Bible
Right.
college out of the Church on the Way. I was at Whitworth College my freshman year, and Azusa Pacific my sophomore year. I was trying to play baseball.
Okay.
And
So was I.
Yeah, and it was during that sophomore year that God said, no, this is what I have for you. And I thought, well, let's negotiate, and kept playing until I hurt my arm. The only thing I couldn't do was throw a baseball. Nothing else
Is
hurt
that
my arm.
right?
Throw a baseball, shooting pain, and I couldn't throw. And so I kind of half obeyed. I left and went to Bible college, kept playing in adult leagues, and until I finally realized this is not working.
It's over.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
finally committed to doing what God had been telling me to do all along.
What position did you play?
Pitcher and outfield mostly through high school, and then moved over to first base by my senior year, and
Okay.
a little bit of that left-handed, so
Oh, you're lefty.
about the only places you can
Right.
play as a lefty.
Right. That's great. In the last few months, you've become the executive director at Alpha Resource Center here in Santa Barbara, which a lot of people know of, but I want to pretend, especially for people on social media that maybe aren't local.
Right.
Tell us about kind of when you got involved at Alpha. I know you were on the board,
Right.
and then the vision, the history. Tell us a little bit about Alpha Resource Center.
Okay. Well, my connection actually started about 12 years ago when my third daughter was born, Hannah. She has Down syndrome.
Okay.
And we found out right when she was born. We didn't have a prenatal diagnosis. In fact, my wife said to the doctor, like moments, we hadn't even held her yet, and my wife looked at her and said, "Can you tell if she has Down syndrome?" She had always felt she would have a child with Down syndrome, and so when we saw
Wow.
that Hannah's features were a little bit different than her sister's, she asked. They were a little panicked. They weren't quite sure how we were going to react. They said, "Give us a few minutes." They left. They came back in and said, "We think so. We'll have to run tests," and they did, and the test confirmed that. It wasn't a big deal to us. There were some medical complications. We had left the hospital, came back, and during that second stay, we met a woman named Chris, who had come from Alpha Resource Center. She was part of the parent-to-parent support, and she let us know all about the services that were going to be available for Hannah, that we weren't alone, that Alpha Resource Center was there with experience and knowledge that we were going to need, which we found out quickly that even though we were fully convinced that raising Hannah was going to be exactly the same as her two older sisters, and it almost is, there's just enough difference and just enough learning that we really needed Alpha to help us get over the hurdles and work through the nuances of a system of
Yeah.
in the schools and the county and all the places where those helps are provided.
Right. So that was your introduction,
Yeah.
and then you went on their board.
Yeah, so my wife started an awareness walk with one of her friends, and then they decided that we should do a bike ride, and I'm a cyclist, so they said, "Would you head that up?" And I said, "Sure." And after a couple years of that, I got invited to be on the board. So I spent 7 years on the board. The last 3 I was board president, and I was actually leading our board through a process of succession planning. So we'd been looking at that for a couple years, and at one point our past board president said, "We really need somebody who knows the organization." Our previous executive director had been in the role for about 27 years, been with the
Wow.
organization for 40, and the board was really worried about bringing somebody in who didn't know the mission, who hadn't lived through it.
Yeah.
So they asked if I'd be interested, and I said, "I am, but I got to step back now and let you guys do what you're going to do." So they created an associate executive director position, which I accepted and was in for about a year and a half as part of that succession planning,
Okay.
and then finally took over just a few months ago now. I think it's about 3 months.
Yeah. So take us through kind of the history, or when it was founded, and then for somebody who doesn't know, what does Alpha do?
Okay, so 1953 is when the organization officially began. It was
Wow.
probably about 1950 that the 3 moms who started it started having their conversations, but 53 is when it was incorporated and really started. And the goal at that time was they wanted their kids to have an education. Education wasn't provided in public schools for children with developmental disabilities. when you really look back at it, what they wanted was their kids to have the same opportunities as everybody else.
Yeah.
And so from that point, it went to education, and then they were successful at getting their kids into the public school system, and all that began to change. And so we just continued to follow the needs. From there, we had adult day programs. We began to support families like mine, how I got it there. So when you first get a diagnosis, you can feel alone. You can think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so our children and family team will come alongside people and support them. So from birth all the way through end of life, we're there to support people. Running our day program, we have an art program, we're working on a culinary program.
Wow.
We're looking to expand into job support, simply because our mission is to empower individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We do it by supporting families, creating opportunities, and fostering belonging. And all of that requires us to listen to what our participants want. Just like those moms who said, I want my kids to have every opportunity. Those adults and the new moms are telling us the opportunities that are needed, so we're continuing to expand to meet those needs.
And so it's not just kids. I mean, it sounds like a good chunk of your work is with adults.
Yeah, in fact, our day programs don't start usually till 22. That's when most kids with developmental disabilities leave the school system at about 22, and so we pick up from there. The support we do with younger kids is primarily helping families navigate the system, work with the schools to get the right services. We do some parent support groups, we do some play groups for young kids just to get people connected with other families like theirs.
Wow.
And form those relationships early. The more services that people get at the beginning of life, from 0 to 3 and in the early years of school, the fewer services and the more successful they are later in life, because they've learned skills and they're out in the world. And that's why the young kids coming out of school now are saying, I want to work, I want to be in a kitchen, I want to be an artist, I want to be an actor. They're just like anyone else.
Right. Is there been success with getting them employed, special needs adults employed in the community? Do you help bridge that, or to find them work, or how does that work?
Well, employment's still a huge issue for people with developmental disabilities in general. We're just moving into it. So there's another organization like ours in Ventura that's been doing it for a while. They've got it down. We're learning from them at this point. So we've been at it for a month now.
Okay,
starting
so that's
to meet,
brand new thing.
It's brand new. Starting to meet with them. We have a few of our participants who work, and then they'll come to our program, or they'll be in our program and leave for work for a few hours. And in looking to meet the needs of their whole life there, we're saying, why should they be leaving Alpha Resource Center to go work where they need the support and they need help? Let's just be with them where they need to be. Really is that next logical step.
Yeah, that's profound. The special needs world, and my family has a special needs daughter, so we've walked this like you have. One of the things that happened with us is a perspective change, and it's probably been an actual ongoing perspective change, but it seems like one of the gifts of special needs is a different perspective. Have you found that?
Yeah. I think more than anything, it's helped me understand that we all bring some unique strengths to the table, and we all have limitations, and we all have areas where we need support. So many people, when they have a child with a developmental disability, feel that they've lost something, that they're missing out. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that's where my perspective has really changed, to realize we've gained another child. She's fully capable. She can do anything that she sets her mind to. She constantly surpasses our expectations. And with our other two daughters who don't have developmental disabilities, they constantly do the things that we never expected them to do. They still need help in all sorts of areas. They have their own unique personalities. She is so much like her sisters. It's amazing. And really, I think that's where my perspective has changed. It's not a population that needs to be pitied. It's not a population we need to feel sorry for. It's a group of people who maybe do things a little differently than we do, and sometimes they get it more right than we do.
That's exactly right. Sometimes I wonder with our daughter, who has the brain injury? You know what I mean? Like sometimes the things she says are so simple and profound that I'm like, who has the special need here? I think it might be me. Like the perspective can be brilliant and profound and simple, and it's with Ella Claire, who's our daughter, I mean, the things she says, she doesn't hold grudges. She doesn't worry about tomorrow. she's always happy to see you, whether you're the busboy at the restaurant or the president of the United States. Like, there's something so simple and wonderful, isn't there, about that?
It's amazing.
It really is amazing.
Yeah, my life has been so dramatically changed in who I am by Hannah's presence in our family. She's softened me. Yeah. She's made me more patient. She's just contributed to all sorts of improvements in who I am.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And one time I was thinking about this. What is the gift in special needs? So I actually hashtagged it, and I found on Instagram that no one had ever hashtagged the gift of special needs.
Wow.
I was the first one. So I don't know what that says about me, but I think it's interesting that we don't see it as a gift. We see it, and of course it's hard. I mean, neither one of us, we've been through this. We're not saying it's not hard. Yeah. It's hard, especially a special needs mom who cares 24/7, as a caregiver. Yeah. We're not discounting that, and I know you're not saying that. But I think seeing it as a gift for a family, I think, is a different approach, which I think is amazing. And I think that's a God thing.
Yeah, I would agree.
I mean, there are literally countries that, I've heard, that are just aborting kids like your and mine, if they're in this category, which I just think is so incredible based on what we've experienced. Here's two grown men who've been completely changed by our special needs daughters in ways that are, we wouldn't trade. And it would be wonderful. And I think this is I think it sounds like this is what you're doing. If other parents who have that newborn child who's given this diagnosis, if they were to see that, okay, there's something special and this can be a gift and a blessing, doesn't mean it's going to be easy, doesn't mean it's going to be, but does that make sense? Do you agree with that?
I mean, there are real challenges. We've been blessed in the sense Hannah hasn't had any serious medical conditions, but we serve people that are confined to a wheelchair, that need to be fed, that need to be toileted, and I see how hard their parents work. Yeah, I see how much they love their children. It doesn't diminish that love at all, and our job is to help the rest of the world understand the value that person brings. Right. I remember at one point one of our participants, David, who's in a wheelchair, basically nonverbal, but he caught my eye as I was rushing through the room to get to somewhere else. I slowed down and said hello to him. He just slowly kind of moved his finger out, and I could tell he just wanted, that was his way of like shaking hands, and so I reached out and touched his hand, and he just had this gentle smile, and I realized, gosh, I miss so much because of the way I live life. Yeah. I think when you look at Scripture, Paul talks about when we're weak, then we're strong. Yeah. And there's something about always needing help in the life of somebody with a disability that causes them to have a strength that's different than ours. They just live in that place all the time, and I don't think my daughter comes to challenges and thinks I can do anything. To a degree, I mean, she's never intimidated, but I don't think she believes it's in her own strength. I think she knows someone will help me. Right. I'll get by. I'll figure it out. Right. There's not this false confidence. There's just a
right. Or it's kind of that rugged independence. They don't bring that, which is what a wonderful thing.
That's a great way of phrasing it.
I mean, they're dependent, joyfully. Yeah. Which there's probably a spiritual lesson in there somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
So you guys have a biological special needs Down syndrome child, and then you decide to adopt another one. Right. Talk to us about that.
So we always knew we wanted to adopt. I had 4 adopted siblings. My wife wanted to adopt at some point. So 3 girls in, we realized if we keep doing this, we're never getting a son, and we're going to end up with way too many children. So we decided after 3 girls we would adopt, and we began to look into the process, and it was around the time that John McCain was running for president. Sarah Palin was his vice president, and she just had a son who had Down syndrome. And so my oldest daughter, I don't even remember how old she would have been at the time, but looked and said, I want a brother with Down syndrome.
Really?
Yeah, my wife and I discussed it, and we thought, well, we've been through it once. We've got Alpha Resource Center who's been supporting us and can help us continue to learn. So we thought, let's look into it. we found out that Hong Kong had a special needs program. They only adopt children who have special needs.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and we fit all the requirements in terms of finances and the space that we had, so we pursued it and ended up with our son Jed, and he's so fun.
Yeah, how old is he now?
He is 8. He was 14 months when we adopted him.
Wow.
He's 8 now. He is boy through and through. We thought we were amazing parents. We didn't realize it was just because we only had girls. We used to watch boy parents run around and think, what are you doing? Like,
Right, what's your problem?
Yeah, how come you can't get your kid to do what they're supposed to do? And we realized, oh, they're boys. Boys are different.
Right.
And so he's probably as much work as the 3 girls, not because he has Down syndrome, but because he's full boy.
He's all boy. Yeah. Wow. I want to switch gears a little bit from special needs for a minute. Mm-hmm. You're an ordained pastor.
Yes.
We had lunch a few weeks ago, and we were talking about faith, and you made a comment to me that it's kind of stuck with me that I'd love to unpack a little bit, which is you were talking about how sometimes maybe we complicate things a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, you know, some of it goes back probably to the church where I grew up, and that leaning towards the legalism and the rules and the way that you do things. And I think it's easy to see a relationship with Jesus as a religion and as a structure. And yet as I've grown up and as I've matured and as God has just worked in my life, I've realized this relationship is actually really easy. You look at Scripture and Jesus just says, hey, follow me. Hey,
Right.
love the people around you. Hey, when you're not sure what to do, be generous. Be gracious.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, I think we complicate it because we feel like there's a right way to do everything. And I don't want to get it wrong.
Right.
And the reality is that there isn't.
Right.
God looks at our heart and he just says, if you care about the person next to you, you're going to figure it out.
Yeah, it'll probably work out.
Uh-huh. You know, I remember the phase where everyone was wearing the What Would Jesus Do bracelets.
Yeah.
And I thought, it's a great concept, but if I've got to slow down and ask myself, what would Jesus do? I'm completely missing the point.
Right.
If I'm just following him, I'm going to do what he does. I'm going
Yeah.
to be where he is. I'm going to be with the people that he's with.
Yeah.
He hung out with the sinners and tax collectors, as they said, and everyone got on, the Pharisees,
Right.
the legalists. How are you doing that? That doesn't meet the rules. And he's like, well, they need to be loved, and they need a doctor. And
Right. Right.
And I'm just going to accept them the way they are.
Yeah.
And so I've moved from a place where I used to think, I'll accept you when you get things right. You got to change, you've got to get things in order, and then you can be part of our group. To the place where I realize I don't even have it together that well. So who am I to set the
Right.
rules? And I think the simplicity of Scripture is just let people come in.
Yeah.
And if you love them, they're going to change. They're going to say, why do you care about me? Why do you accept me with all my faults?
Right.
Why do you look past my mask?
Right.
And
We need to tell the people in Washington, D.C. about this, too. I think that wouldn't be a bad idea. But it is, I love that. I think we overthink it, maybe. And probably well-intentioned.
Yeah, absolutely well-intentioned.
Yeah. Sometimes I just think if we just did, the thing about, I was reading the other day, it doesn't just say love your enemies. It actually says if your enemy comes to you asking you for money, to give it to them, and don't expect it back.
Right.
Now what if we put that one into practice?
Yeah.
It probably changed the world. Just this little. I'd never read that before. I knew about love your enemies, but I'm like, man,
Right.
what if we did that?
Well, we're so focused on fair, right?
Right.
As if
Wisdom.
As if it was fair that Jesus had to come down and die for my sins.
Right.
All of Christianity is built on something that's completely unfair, and
Right.
yet we want everything to be fair. We want
Yeah.
people to earn grace. We want people to earn their
Yes.
salvation. We want people to.
Yes.
And the reality is that's not what God requires of me.
Yeah.
And so he's made me unique. He's given me strength. He's asked me to do something. He's placed value in me. He's done the same thing in everyone else. And
Yeah.
I really think that's the core of Christianity, is just see other people through the eyes of Jesus.
Yeah. Love. Love is the answer. We could probably wrap the program up right now, but we got to love is the answer. You spoke at Westmont College recently in chapel, and I loved it. Share a little bit about, and maybe we just did, but share a little bit about what you shared with the students. I'd love to hear a little bit of that.
Yeah, it's in a similar vein, and it probably ties a lot of what we've been talking about together, because I was there in my capacity as executive director, but I didn't just want to give people a history of Alpha Resource Center.
Right.
So we were really looking at Scripture and how does it relate to people who have developmental disabilities? What perspective does it give us? And so we jumped into the well-known passage in Micah. What's the Lord require of you? To do justly, to love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Talk about simple, right?
Yeah, right.
Just do what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Be kind and patient with other people, and have a humility that says, I'm not any more special than the guy next to me.
Yeah.
And when we back up and we really think about it, none of that requires intellect. None of that requires education.
Right.
None of that requires physical strength. Anybody can live those things out. So people with developmental disabilities are fully equipped to meet the requirements of God.
Yeah.
We're the ones who decide, well, you've got to be eloquent. You've got to be educated. You've got to be wealthy.
Right.
And so if we back up and we just understand what God actually requires of us, it goes back to what we talked about. I learned from my daughter because she does those three things better than I do most days.
Yeah. I was just going to say, and walking humbly doesn't mean you think you're a schmuck.
No.
I mean, like sometimes I'll say to Ella Claire, she has 14 jobs in our house. So she's chore commissioner, for example. And I'll say, man, you are a great chore commissioner. And she says, yes, I am. Mm-hmm. And it's like she's pretty comfortable with who she is, and it's not this arrogance or false or pretense. It's just, thank you, yes, I am.
Yeah.
And I love that. And there's something pure about. So we could talk a long time about what we can learn, I think, from special needs people.
Yeah.
And I think if more special needs families, and autism is an epidemic, and this is becoming, lots of families are coming home with a child on the spectrum.
Right.
And I just think it is incredible that your message, this truth about it, it's not a mistake.
Right.
This is a child of God that's been given to you, and it can be a gift and a blessing, and it can turn your world. It will turn your world upside down in a difficult way, but it can also turn your world upside down in a wonderful way. Right. Does that?
Yeah, I'm convinced that when Paul says that for those who love the Lord, God works all things together for good. That it's not the way we often read it, that God steps into bad situations and makes them better. That would suppose that at some point God is out of control. And things are just running their course, and then he has to come in and clean it up. I really think that what Paul says, if you back through that, because it talks about predestination and foreknowledge, and that God is actually working these things out for us, and that when Hannah came into our life, it wasn't that now God had to clean up our family, it was that he brought her in intentionally. He made her exactly the way she was because he knew that's what she needed to be for us and what she needed to be for her.
Right, and he knew what you needed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife and I have been married for 20 years. The first year and a half, 2 years were awful, and most of that was probably because of who I was.
Huh.
And
I can't relate to that.
Yeah, angry all the time, legalistic, like I said, unrealistic expectations, and we started to work through it, but it was really 12 years ago, so 8 years into our marriage that Hannah shows up and really starts to change us. And I can still remember a moment where so Hannah she responds differently to directions. With our other kids, we could say, hey, time to put your stuff away, we need to go to bed. They could just stop what they're doing and put it away. Hannah, you've got to get a little lead time. You're gonna go to bed in about 10 minutes, so don't start anything new, and you've got to kind of lead her in, because she has to be able to, the way her mind processes, she has to finish something before she can move to the next thing. I didn't understand this when she was young, so I would say, hey, do this, and she wouldn't do it. She would keep doing what she was doing, and I thought, you're not following the rules.
Right.
Legalistic, not understanding it, wanting to be in charge. And so I gotten angry and yelled at her at one point, and she cowered and went and sat down against this wall that we had, this kind of narrow wall with a mirror on it. And it took me a few minutes, and I realized, gosh, I'm being an idiot again. And so I walked over and I just kind of slid down on the wall and sat down next to her. She was maybe 3 or 4 at the time. Her speech hadn't come yet, so she had almost no words. And I said to her, Hannah, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't yell at you. And before I could say, will you forgive me or do anything of my own, she just turned her whole body and hugged me. And I thought, this is so backwards.
Right.
Why in the world does this little girl, who I've just totally wronged, who has no way of expressing anything in words, who has none of the traits that we think are necessary to make us successful,
right,
and to do things well, how can she just completely forgive me?
Yeah.
And just express this kind of love? And I it was the point where I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to be at least as capable as my daughter.
Right.
And so it began to change. I began to really work on the anger and those types of things. And I'm mostly better.
Yeah. Welcome to the club.
But my kids no longer call me the angry daddy. So that's
good.
That's a good thing.
You know, but you've been tenderized.
Yeah.
I've been tenderized. I mean, I just think that's remarkable.
Yeah. I think in some ways I've been humanized.
Yeah.
It's made me.
Has it changed your other kids?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Our older two, number 2 and number 3, the 2 middle kids still go at each other a little bit. Right. That's what kids do. It's not anything out of the norm. But they're softer. They're more understanding. They're accepting of people just the way they are because they've watched their siblings grow up and watched them develop slower than typical and haven't thought twice. In fact, we've got this kind of low window in the front of our house, and there's a couch backed up to it. And years ago, there was a girl in the neighborhood. She was probably 1.5 years, 2 years old, really small, and she came up to the window and the girls were talking to her, and she responded back in a full sentence, which is very normal for a 2-year-old, but not for their siblings. And they both turned around and said, she can talk. And we realized their perspective has been so changed.
Right.
They don't have any preconceived expectations of what people do. You do what you do.
Yeah.
We communicate with Hannah and Jed the way they need to be communicated with. Jed's language is getting much better, but still needing some work. And so they're softer. They're more accepting. They value people exactly as God has made them.
That's wonderful.
They're off to a good head start.
And it'll affect their life profoundly for the rest of their life. And we'll wrap up, but we're talking about the idea, the truth that we're all wounded.
Yeah.
So you and I don't have Down syndrome, but we're wounded people. Everybody's wounded. We would go to when Ella Claire was little, we went back to Philadelphia to this institute that helped brain injured children mostly. And one of the times, we would go back twice a year. And one of the times we were there, I realized there's no handicapped parking spots because we're all handicapped. And I wrote that to some friends, and one of my professor friends at Weitzman wrote back, and he's like, that's really interesting, that we're kind of, that's a different way of seeing people. A brain injured child who drools, doesn't wake up in the morning and say, I really would like to drool today. They just can't feel their lip probably, and so they drool. They're injured. I think if we walked around understanding that we're just dealing with a lot of injuries here, it would change our perspective.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about humility. I read a report recently. It was a study. And they said, similar to what you had said, humility isn't thinking less of us. It's not diminishing our gifts. They said, in fact, the people that are the most humble, as they studied it, are those who understand exactly what they do well. They're totally fine with that. But they recognize that their gifts don't make them any more special than the next person.
Right.
And I think in the inverse, that is true as well. My brokenness, my faults, my limitations don't make me any less valuable than the next person.
Right.
We all have them. We all have the things God's made us good at. We all have the things that we struggle with. We all have our brokenness.
Yeah.
And if we would just embrace each other And
yeah.
When it comes down to it, right, I don't need a savior if I'm not a sinner. I don't need a savior. I don't need a healer if I'm not unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I'm not sick. So to even begin to think about having a relationship with Jesus, I have to come to the place that I'm incapable.
Yeah.
I'm broken.
I'm dependent.
Yes.
Yeah. This is fantastic. I think we should do this again.
Yeah.
Alpha Resource Center is where Josh works. Josh is the leader of Alpha Resource Center. How can people get involved with you, with Alpha, if they wanted to? Maybe the website. I know you have an event or a couple events. To talk a little bit about that before we go.
Yeah, the website is alphasb.org, like Santa Barbara.
Okay.
We right now we're just really trying to tell people our story. So we run 2 thrift stores. Alpha thrift stores are owned and operated by us. Yeah, they help us support many of the programs that we do. But a lot of people who have been in town even for a long time, you say Alpha and they think of the thrift stores and they don't actually know the mission.
Right.
So one of the best ways that people can help us is by starting to get the word out. And if they want to contact us, get through the website, you can look there. We do what we call Imagine Tours, where we'll walk you through our campus and you get to meet a few parents and a participant, hear their stories, and really get to see the mission in action. And it can transform your understanding both of people with developmental disabilities and the work that we do. And then you can become the evangelist, so to speak, of Alpha Resource Center. When people say, hey, I go shop at Alpha, you can say, but let me tell you what the clothes
what it's
really
all about.
provide.
Right. That's wonderful. So alphasb.org.
Yes.
Okay, we'll check it out. And Josh, it's great to be with you. We'll do this again.
Enjoyed it, Dan.
Love it. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.